Jazz and Beyond on 702 and Cape Talk, where you come for the jazz, you stay for a good time. And of course, I just love the fact that we have this platform on YouTube and Prime Media Plus for Jazz and Beyond, where we get to talk to our guests and get into much deeper conversations. And we have more time to address some of the issues that we've always wanted to get into and also understand a little more. And what I'm excited about today is that our guest is one who is going to help us take a look back to 2025. It will be a snapshot of the highlights, of the challenges, also of some of the artists who've dominated the South African jazz scene, and also just looking ahead to 2026 as to what we can expect. Now, there is no better person to have a conversation about this with than she's a regular, in fact, on the show at the end of the year to do this, to recap what the year has been like. And I'm talking about Gwen Ansell. You're familiar with her. This is Gwen because she's a freelance writer. She's a researcher. She is an author. She every week reviews some jazz albums. So she really has her finger on the, what do you call it, on the pulse of the jazz scene. So I always like to call her and ask her about things. Right now, I'm having a whole conversation with her. And a very warm welcome to Gwen. How are you doing, Gwen?
Hi, Notemba. I'm fine. And hi to the 702 listeners.
What a pleasure to have you. So, maybe in one phrase, has it been a good year for jazz in 2025 in this country? Or is there a lot of improvement that could have happened?
Well, as usual, I'm not going to give you a straight answer. It's been a very good year in terms of music produced. But as always, that doesn't necessarily mean that all musicians are flourishing.
Yeah, I guess. So then maybe let's start at by maybe looking at, should we say, events, festivals, concerts, jazz venues. Has there been more coming up, or maybe are there some just popping up per event, or do we need something more stable and consistent?
Look, we do have venues. And here I must point out, I can only talk about Johannesburg.
Yeah.
That's the city I know best. We do have venues. They struggle from gig to gig. They don't necessarily get the kind of support from the city that we would like to see, but there are venues, and there are increasingly what I would call events, mini festivals. For example, just last weekend, I was at Umanyano Loy Jazz, which was held this year in Houghton. And that was a fabulous event. It was to me, a surprisingly young audience.
Yes.
Seriously interested in the music, seriously listening, behaving much better than some older audiences sometimes do. And a range of really adventurous jazz artists, from well-known names to less well-known names. And I think if we look nationally, there are also some new festivals establishing themselves, like Prince Albert in the Cape, which I think is now coming up to, I'm not sure if it's its fourth year or its fifth year, has now landed on the jazz calendar. And in many ways, I think the future of events lies much more in these slightly smaller local festivals rather than in the massive mega national festivals, which are incredibly hard to sustain financially.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of venues, what we're looking for is cities who take planning for what has been called the night city more seriously, who actually see this as part of the economy of the city, the events that happen after the offices have closed.
When you talk about the challenges that these venues have, or these mini festivals. What are those kind of challenges?
Well,
As you say, the city needs to support, but in what way?
well, obviously, and I probably don't need to say it, money.
Mm.
It's very, very hard to put on an event that involves what, for example, all the research that I've been involved in says is the main cost of any music event, which is transport.
Mm-hmm.
And increasingly these days, we also have to think about things like the environmental impact of transport, particularly where it involves flying people in. The carbon cost of that is huge. But also simply making things happen on time to the best possible quality. It wasn't just artists who suffered during COVID. Everybody, sound engineers, everybody else,
The whole
they
value
all
chain.
still have, the whole value chain still has debts to pay and financial recovery to undertake, even now, even 3-4 years after the pandemic.
Mm.
And I think support for money. But then when you look at venues in cities, you think of issues like parking. You think of issues like late transport for people who come into city centres, for example, from the townships, who find it extremely hard to get back if they don't have their own transport because Ubers won't take them there very late at night in some cases. So there's that. There are other things. The communication about who an artist is if they come from one town to another and people perhaps don't know them so well. And I'm starting to see the emergence of what one might call a circuit. There's an organization called the Festival Enterprise Catalyst, I think I've got that right, which has now linked together with government and many of our festivals, not just jazz festivals, but other kinds of music festivals, literature festivals, and are trying to create a circuit where artists can go from one venue to another nationally, receive publicity so that people know they're coming and know who they are. It's very much in its infancy. I think it's been going for about a year.
Mm-hmm.
But I think setting up a workable circuit would solve some of those problems. And the money problems, there really ought to be subsidies to support the arts, but that's been said so many times I don't need to repeat it. Cities need to think about how they zone places so that parking is available, so that licenses can be granted, even if they're not granted on a long-term, at least on a short-term basis.
Mm.
There are a million different ways. In many European countries, there is a function called the night mayor, not the nightmare, but the night mayor, who is the city official tasked with making sure that a healthy, vibrant city nightlife, including music, happens and is supported in all the ways it needs.
To avoid the nightmare.
To avoid the nightmare, yes, very well put. And I think some of our bigger cities really need to be looking at a night administration which, rather than seeing music and the crowds that music attracts and all of that as a nuisance, sees it as a source of economic well-being and supports it.
And that's actually a great idea. And especially because a lot of people are even wary of going out at night because they can't trust never mind the transport, the security, their safety.
Look, clubs have closed because staff members have been attacked going home late, and that's something else we don't think about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so those are some of the things we can think of for going forward, and hopefully that the cities are listening. Maybe other cities like Cape Town or the Eastern Cape maybe have a better infrastructure.
Well, and I would say Durban, which is
yes.
flourishing as a music city. It has the Music in Bizo every year now.
Yeah.
It really is establishing itself.
Which is fantastic. Okay, I want us to go into a very sad part of 2025 because we've had some very sad losses of great South African musicians who you've written about, and actually helped me in my research about them, with the information. And can we get into some of these icons that you think, and what becomes very important about us, not forgetting them now that they are gone,
Yes, I think it's invidious to pick out one and say
Sure.
this passing was more important than this other passing.
Mm.
They were all passing. Somebody said, I can't remember who, when a musician dies, a library burns.
Mm.
And I think
That's a great quote, that one. Yeah.
That is the frame within which we need to look at this. Firstly, it's their music, and hopefully there is a recorded archive of that. But it's also their thinking and the circles of influence they have created, the people who, somebody like Feafaku shaped so many young trumpeters by the work he did and the example he set.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that as well. And there's also their memories. And one of the things that really distresses me is some broadcasters, and you are one of them, do take the time and trouble to interview musicians about more than the latest release. Mm-hmm. Very often when we interview musicians, we simply say, come on, tell us about the album. And that's interesting, and it needs to be done. But there's a whole life there, and it is the life that has shaped the music. And I just wish there was more in all media that actually paid attention to that. If you look at the print media these days, they barely do it. And that, I think, is a great shame. I used to call myself a music journalist, and I don't anymore because there is no music journalism. There is the occasional profile piece when someone, as I said, has a new album out. But between that, we are not documenting our scene. When I wrote my book, Soweto Blues, it was so wonderful to be able to go back to the old drum magazines and actually read what Todd Matshikiza had documented about the artists who were working in his era. And I sometimes wonder what people will find, researchers in 50 years from now, when they go back to look at the scene today. They will find individual Facebook pages if they haven't been taken down. What else will they find?
Yeah. And also, you're so right about, when you're having a conversation with a musician, that it's, yes, obviously, because they're a musician, you're interviewing them and about the music. But I have found the most incredible stories that they share.
Indeed.
Outside of the music, because it also just helps you then even understand, the music and what then, nurtures it and also influences their philosophy and their thought processes. And they've got the most interesting stories. Some, of course, incredibly sad, and some absolutely just spectacular in terms of, especially with their travels and who they meet, what happens, because it's not, their life is just not on stage. They have a family, they have, they have relationships, they have children, they have upbringings, all those, like any, normal person is influenced by the kind of life you had as a child. It impacts who you become as an adult.
I think one of my strongest examples of that was the late Pops Mohammed, whom we lost only a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
His whole
days ago
lifetime of breaking down boundaries was because of his upbringing as a person of mixed heritage in a so-called coloured area of Johannesburg. And what that taught him about the fakeness of those boundaries. And of course he took that into his music. That's why he chose to play, among other instruments, the Senegambian kora.
Yeah.
Not just South African instruments.
And also, you're so right in terms of the importance of the documentation of musicians and because right now, jazz platforms are few and far, between. And I was having a conversation with Mbuso Khoza. He was at an event that he was invited by the former president Thabo Mbeki, where he did a song, and so while he was on stage doing that, I recorded him on my phone, and I sent him the video. He was so grateful, and he says, "Do you know, it's the only thing I have that I can say this happened for me."
Yes.
And I said, but this is why in today's world, it's very important that no one is going to record it for you. You have to make the effort that the things that you do, find a way of capturing them, because we'll just talk about them and they disappear. But once they are, they are recorded or at least written down, we have that information.
It would be really nice, though, wouldn't it, to have a Johannesburg Jazz Museum? Wouldn't it?
Johannesburg, South African jazz
Well,
musician.
yes. I'll settle for a national one, but we could start small in our own city. Give us a room in Museum Africa. They have some exhibits on, for example, shebeens.
Yeah.
But, that's a long time ago in the history of South African jazz. A great deal has happened since then.
The memorabilia,
yes,
that is in people's homes, that could be sitting in that museum. The family members of so many of these icons who have passed on would then at least know that their memory, the guitar or the saxophone or the trumpet or the books they read or whatever, they would.
Absolutely. This is not jazz, but one of my research colleagues, Professor Christine Lucia, recently published a book on the composer Michael Mwerane. And in the end, his family was reduced to searching through the sheet music in his piano stool because there was no collection anywhere of all his compositions. So a massive compositional opus is reduced to what the family could find. One of those piano stools with a lid.
Yes.
That's basically the core of what has been recovered. And there is just so much like that. I'm sure that Samro, for example, is sitting on the historical documents of many musicians who have passed.
Yeah. What an idea. Actually, we must explore that. Let's talk about some incredible album releases that have come out of 2025.
This is the question I told you I was probably going to refuse to answer.
I know you don't want to name anybody because
if I name somebody, I have to name everybody. And if I leave somebody out, they're going to think, "What's the matter? Doesn't she think mine was any good?"
Let me tell you some of the releases that I think have not in any order, but just some that I could try and remember have come out, which is quite a lot. We've had Keenan Meyer, we've had Andile Yanana, Steve Dyer, Malcolm Giuliani, Doom Jali Skyjack, Kyle Shepard, Gujenga, Dudu Puane, Tembi Dujana, Mallory Jane, Benjamin Jafta, Zawadi, Miriam Altman. There's this
Buma Shilwane. Yes, I see the problem now.
Exactly.
I have not by any means been comprehensive, and I've reviewed 34 albums this year.
And they're 52 weeks.
Yes. I occasionally actually sound off about various officials who've done silly things.
Yes, you do.
So they're not all reviews.
Yeah.
But yes, it is impossible to pick out one. I think if I was talking about trends, I would say one of the trends I'm noticing is not just in the albums of vocalists, but in jazz albums more generally. People are using voices a lot more.
Yes.
And using indigenous voices a lot more. And that is really noticeable to me. And if you want like the extreme example of that, it's obviously Paris Dlamini's album. But there's a lot of this in a lot of people's different work.
Absolutely.
Voices are cropping up everywhere, and it's becoming really noticeable. And when Linda Shabalala opened her set at Umanyano Lue Jazz, she opened with a piece of a cappella singing from herself and two other ladies. And I know, for example, Yonela Manana's album uses the Soul Tea sisters, whom he has trained. So we're actually seeing voice, which is a deep-rooted South African tradition, coming much more back into all kinds of jazz, not just into albums that call themselves vocal albums.
True, because even Duduzo Makatini, when I had him as a guest and I was asking him about his introduction of voice, he said, actually, I grew up singing, and
Yes.
I realized that this is my space. So
Well, he produced Paris's album, of course.
there you go. I mean, we've also had the Vuma Levines, the Lumanyano Mzi, and which actually, let's talk about these incredible young musicians who are in the US and getting
Yes.
all this influence and I don't know, should I say great foundation, but still, are not being drawn away from their own South African influence in style.
Well, one of the big surprises for me this year was Apiwa Bubu's album.
Yes.
He's working in the States. He's worked with, pop names, very big pop names. He has his own studio. Then he records a solo South African piano album, which is an absolute classic of South African piano jazz.
Yes.
And it doesn't leave people.
No, it doesn't. I don't. We also have Sia Charles is also out there.
Yes, and Sia's got an album coming out in the coming years. So
absolutely.
Yes.
Which is absolutely amazing. So let's we've covered the shift in the jazz style, which is obviously in bringing in the vocals. But let's talk about. You mentioned it in the audience of Ulmanyano Jazz, how the jazz audience is becoming younger and younger, and the musicians.
Yes. I think younger musicians shouldn't surprise us so much. We've always had youthful prodigies, and I just think we're seeing more of them, and this is probably to do with the mass media and the dissemination of their work. But it is lovely for me to see young audiences whom nobody has told you will enjoy this music,
Yes.
but who have gravitated to this music because it offers something richer and deeper than, let's say, Amapiano. No discredit to Amapiano, but it's good time music. You can't sit there silently and listen to it.
Yeah.
But I was observing over the weekend at Umanyano, people quiet, not talking, obeying the request that if they wanted to have a chat on their phone, there was another area where they could go to do that.
Well,
And
you went on
intently
you went on
observing.
the right day, because on Sunday it was. Well, I guess the music that was performed on the Sunday when I went just had everybody on fire.
Well, no,
simply-
people
yes.
were on their feet, people were
okay.
dancing, but they were listening.
Yeah.
And they were talking about the music. This was the remarkable thing to me. And I think much as we worry about the impact of online media and the way it pushes people towards homogenized tastes, I think people are gravitating back towards the things that are identifiably our kind of jazz.
And I also like that I think the consciousness and the awareness that look, what is online is not necessarily all it's supposed to.
All there is. This is the
all
big
there
myth.
is, yes.
That anything you want to hear, you can hear on Google. It's absolutely not true.
And people are loving the interaction with other humans in those kind of spaces. And I'm like you. I'm very happy with the younger generation picking up on jazz, and also with the young musicians who are also, the messaging in their music is a very conscious one
Yes.
of the society around, and also just garnering, the audience into think about things,
Look, we live
and
in
just,
very strange times.
Yeah,
And I think anybody who's halfway conscious notices that.
yeah.
The music is talking about it. The audiences are talking about it. And I think there's just a sense that what in the 80s we used to call bubblegum doesn't feed that hunger.
Yeah.
There are other kinds of music that feed that hunger much better. and actually speak for people and help people themselves to speak.
Yeah, and I mean, even if one appreciates the bubble gum, but it has its own corner and moments. But in the majority of the time,
It's party music.
it's
There's
it
nothing wrong with
yes,
party music. We all
exactly.
enjoy a good party.
Yeah.
But the fact is that music can do much more than that.
Mm. You did a research, was it last year or the year before, where you were looking into the role of women in
That was
in
right at the end
music.
of last year. It was, in fact,
Yes,
almost exactly a year from now.
from now, yes, and so I just wanted to find out from you that post that research and the outcomes of it. Have you seen any movement in the jazz scene where women's role and how they are impacted?
I'm seeing more women instrumentalists. I do not know whether that is I doubt it's a result of our research. I think it's a process which is happening.
Yeah.
But I think it's really too soon to say. The organization that I do research with, IKS, is actually currently working on some research about best practice for live music venues. And I think when the results of that are in, we will begin to see whether there are actually any policies developing.
What best
Practice
are you
every
talking
venue
about?
should have an anti-bullying and harassment policy, for example.
I hear. Okay.
Those kinds of things.
Okay.
I would like very much to look at the bills of jazz festivals. And I think Joy of Jazz did very well this year in terms of featuring female artists, not just female singers, but female artists.
Mm-hmm.
But I would like to look at festivals more broadly and say, you look at most festival bills and they're 2/3 male. So there are signals that would tell us things are changing, but I really think it's too soon without doing any serious research to actually talk about that.
talk about it. Okay. Now, the realities of all South Africans is the economic situation and our livelihood. And for musicians who don't have full-time jobs and who rely on various, platforms, be it streaming or the live performances or maybe selling CDs or albums, and maybe just having the enough publicity to get their name out there. What's your view on what 2025 did?
We did research on streaming in 2023. Streaming doesn't make a living for most artists. And in fact, the global monopoly streaming platforms aren't interested in anybody who isn't going to sell billions and gazillions. We all know that Spotify actually now doesn't pay anything to people who get fewer than a certain number of hits in a year. So streaming is great for networking. It's great for reaching out to other people. It's great for establishing relationships with artists elsewhere. It's great for getting a little bit of a profile beyond your own national borders. It's not a moneymaker. And to become a moneymaker, you have to basically do the kind of music that sells in large numbers in high-income countries, which in many cases means losing the thing that makes our kind of jazz. Always, all the research tells us that actually with a flourishing live music scene, and ours did take a knock during COVID, it is live performance and the things that you leverage off live performance that really make you the money. But I think the thing that is neglected, and this is something, again, we have some research on the back burner about, but it's probably going to come to the boil this year. One of the things people don't realize is how much musicians put into their work unremunerated. If you think about the number of things that an artist has to do, they have to look for their own gigs. They very often have to do their own publicity. They have to pull a band together. They have to keep that band together, which is, if you like, emotional labor. They have to rehearse. They
find
have to
rehearsal
practice,
space.
yes, and pay for it. Yeah, it's like a million things which we can put under the category of unpaid work. And when people ask the perennial question, why do musicians die in poverty? The answer is because they have spent a great deal, physical, emotional, financial, that you never see. And that, I think, is something that we need to think about. And in particular, those who fund projects, whether this is donors or commercial entities or government, when you are funding a project, don't say to people, you know, we can only pay your immediate costs for the gig, we cannot pay overheads, what. Because an awful lot of what musicians spend is precisely on those things that go under overheads, the things that are necessary to make the gig happen.
I mean, we have these grants that keep coming out from the Department of Arts, Sports, Arts and Culture, or the National Arts Council. Is it? Yes. And half the time they're like, we're not paying for any of everything.
No, you're not paying for everything.
everything.
You're paying for the immediate costs of the gig.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, to make that gig happen, so much has gone in
Yep.
that you don't see, that you don't pay for, but it has cost the musicians. It is a cost element in their budget, if not in yours.
Is there a complete non-awareness or misunderstanding of how the cultural landscape works for these government entities? You know,
When we've done surveys, people have said that, and I'm talking particularly now about civil servants, that there is simply no understanding of how musicians work. There's almost an assumption of, oh, you don't have a job, therefore we can't do anything with you because you don't fit into any of our standard categories.
yeah.
It's just a failure to understand how the landscape works. And I think what's needed at the most basic level is a bit of listening. Listen to what musicians are saying.
Yeah.
Listen to what people like you who are commentators on the scene are saying. I think that would begin. It wouldn't solve the problem, but it would be a very good start.
For them to listen and to listen to understand.
Yes.
Because sometimes you can
Absolutely.
listen, but without necessarily, but just like, I was there, I heard it, but what did you walk away with? Okay. On that note, actually, so what are these conversations that are not happening, that need to be happening right now around jazz, and maybe also just the significance of this art form existing and its cultural impact, and also on the economy, and also just on preserving the South African identity, culture, and legacy, because music and art is seen as a what do they call it? Something to do in your spare time, you know, by a lot of people who are not in this space, and they forget that when life hits them, that's the go-to place. You know.
Look, I think it's everything we've talked about at this time. I think it is the issue of the potential of music to contribute to the economy, particularly to the micro-level economies of cities and suburbs. A music venue does actually more than just put on music. It draws people to a place. It can support area improvement. People start getting a sense of pride. If you look in Joburg at a venue like the African Freedom Station, there's a real community around that venue who care about where they are, which is Sophiatown.
Yeah.
So there's that. But I think in many ways too much of the discussion is about simply the instrumental side, what money can earn from music, what music can do to build social cohesion or whatever. Those things happen, but they're not what music's for. Music is for something much deeper than that. Music is for on the side of the listener, providing exactly what you just described, which is that balm when things get tough. But it also does that for the artist. And I think the other thing we are still not talking enough about is opportunities for people to make music as well as consume music. There's too much talking about consuming music. If you look at many of our schools, there is no access for people to make music. They can't afford instruments, they don't have rehearsal spaces. And for heaven's sake, there is enough that schools have to do, reading, arithmetic. We do understand that. But the capacity to make music is an incredibly important thing for a young person growing up. Whatever kind of music they make, whether it's jazz, whether it's amapiano, or whether it's hip-hop, it doesn't matter. So I think access, and I think these days you have to link that to a huge and persistent problem in this country, which is the digital divide. Close to 40% of our population still do not have easy, affordable digital access.
True.
We talk about how, everything happens online.
No.
Not for a third or more of our population, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And yet you cannot these days break into the music industry unless you are on the right side of the digital divide and unless you have certain skills.
Because some of these young musicians they just have a laptop and then they create the music.
I mean, this is how amapiano grew up. It
Yeah.
grew up out of ringtones, for heaven's sake. And that's important. But what about the people in deep rural areas with no disposable income, with really bad signal, with load reduction all the time, with all of those things? They don't have easy, affordable digital access. And I think this country's digital divide is a completely neglected aspect of the conversations we're having about music.
But outside of the digital direction that we're going towards, I'm just sad about the physically learning an instrument rather than
Yes.
creating it via some AI device.
And learning the history that goes with it. Because I think the other thing is, when I talk to lots of young people, they don't know the cultural history of this country, and it isn't yet in our textbooks.
Yeah.
Now, 30 years after so-called liberation, that's shameful.
Yeah, these libraries that are needed for access to.
Well, never mind
music,
libraries, a
but
basic
the
school
books,
textbook on the history of South African music, which is accessible to every learner and not just people in Model C schools. That would be a start.
Yeah, I'm hoping that somebody's listening who makes decisions and policies, and especially.
You have lots of listeners, Notemba, probably more than you even suspect.
Look, with the apparent Department of Education relooking the educational system, let's hope that a very crucial element is going to be included.
There has been work done on this.
Okay.
I know this, but it hasn't actually turned into significant elements in curriculums. A friend of mine was, a couple of years back now, awarding a visual arts prize called the Tami Manyele Prize. And one of the young people who qualified for that prize had to ask her, who is Tami Manyele?
There you go.
That should not happen.
Yeah.
That is as much a part of the history of our liberation as the great statesmen like Nelson Mandela.
But what is also just inspiring is that a lot of the musicians, the older generation, are teaching. And they tell me they are imparting some of this knowledge.
Yes.
And teaching about South African music.
But it's
and
really
others.
hard for a
Yes.
musician who doesn't have a formal academic qualification to actually get into many schools and universities.
Yeah, which is... okay, let's look at some new talent to look out for in 2026. Who have you smelt
Who have,
on the horizon?
No,
on the
I
horizon.
refuse to answer that question.
Gwen.
I honestly, if I say this one is good, someone somewhere is going to be saying, but why didn't she mention me? And
I know.
Music isn't a zero-sum game. Everybody who comes up is worth listening to.
True.
If, for example, you look at the WhatsApps that Spoo Mashilwane posts from UKZN of his young students performing in class. There's a whole generation there who are going to knock your socks off when they get out into the world. So no, I'm not going to name names, but I'm going to say there are probably some very good things coming.
Okay. What do we need in 2026 for us not to have some of the things we've talked about today?
I think we need these initiatives about establishing performance circuits because they support everybody. They support the area where it happens, they support the venue, they support the artist. I think if we could do something towards solidifying those and make them work better, I think that would be an amazingly good start.
Funding-wise?
Funding-wise, budgets for projects that actually take into account the amount of unpaid labour that artists put in to making music happen.
Documentation?
We need archives, we need museums, whether in cities, whether a national museum or not. So much of our cultural history is burning whenever one of our great artists passes on.
And lastly, what would you say to, a young, very hungry to be a musician, artist who's like, I'd really love this music. I'd really love to get into it, but I don't see how I can pay my bills.
The answer is you can't, and I would never fool anybody. It's what I say to young journalists when I'm training young writers. Try and have a plan B. Develop another skill from which you can earn. And do the best you can in the thing that you love.
Yeah.
Work at it. Those are really, I'm in no position to give anybody lessons, but to say work, and work some more, but also have a plan B because you may well not make money out of this.
Yeah. And talking about journalists that you teach, how has been coverage of jazz from, journalists that either have come up
There isn't
from
any.
you?
Notemba, let's be honest. There are individuals on various newspapers who try by all means. None of the freelancers, and I'm also a freelancer that I know, are finding regular work writing about music. They're finding work writing about business or AI or whatever, but not about music. There's not a living in it. That is part of the lack of archive because that's partly where archive comes from.
And look, we have to applaud and appreciate those individuals who are just passionate about jazz.
Absolutely.
Who take their time on Facebook, create, platforms where they expose jazz musicians and album releases.
The problem is that's not stable. All it needs is for Elon Musk to take over Facebook and decide it's all woke, and it'll disappear overnight. The findings of the G20
because that can go away anytime.
Were wiped the day after Trump took over the chairmanship of the G20. All the wonderful work that countries did in Johannesburg was wiped the next day. So if you're doing stuff online, for heaven's sake, at least have a hard drive or something where you're keeping it, because it can disappear tomorrow. And that's what worries me about so much happening online. But having said that, I agree with you. There is splendid documentation being done online.
Yeah. Gwen, I know we could talk because there's so many other things that, especially between us that we love about, jazz and this art form and the musicians that we can talk about. But we have to come to a closing at some point. Thank you for the work you do.
Thank you for the work you do. You're part of it as well, Notemba.
Thank you, especially because, are you? Where else are you documenting the write-ups you do and all these articles outside?
I have a hard drive. That's it.
So because we need that to this library we're going to establish for jazz in Johannesburg and hopefully nationally. Gwen Ansell, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for being part of Jazz and Beyond as we wrap up 2025. And
thank you too, Notemba.
All the best for you in 2026.
All the best for the next year.
And for jazz.
And for jazz. Keep listening to the music.
Yes, thank you. Jazz and Beyond on 702 and Cape Talk, where you come for the jazz And then you get surprised because, gee, we have a good time too.
Come for the jazz and stay for the good times.
On Jazz and Beyond with Notemba Madumo.
On 702 and Cape Talk.